is the Fight Back podcast, hosted by exercise scientist Georgia Berry. Here you'll find a series of honest conversations about martial arts and mental health. My guests and I explore the statement that every martial artist has heard: martial arts saved me. How and why do combat sports save people? Listen to find out. Hollie, welcome to the Fight Back podcast. Everyone, I am here with Hollie Bakerboljkovac. She is a counsellor and a coach with 36 years experience as a martial artist. Hollie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Georgia. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so excited to dig into the incredibly rich and diverse experience that you have had throughout your life, which you really almost seem like someone who was made to be on this show with all the different things that we're going to dig into today. Let's provide an overview actually for everyone. Today we're going to talk about your experience starting martial arts when you were 3. We're going to talk about having martial arts as a guiding thing throughout your life. We're going to talk about your work as a counsellor, what you've come to know about the impact of domestic violence on your clients. We're going to talk about Motion Ninja Academy, which is the school that you've developed teaching martial arts to adults and children, and some of the, I think, different perspectives that you've got energetically from the counselling, from the lifelong martial arts, in terms of how that can be done differently and how you do teach differently to the average person. We're going to talk about cycle syncing, which I'm super excited to talk about. So for all the women, you're going to love that part. And there's going to be more. So let's start at the start. Tell us a bit about your life story and then how martial arts has impacted you along the way.
Oh, okay. So 3 sounds a bit crazy, but so I lived in a really small town in Victoria, and there was no sport or anything other than cricket or tennis. It's in the 80s. And one of the young people in the town had started to do karate, like sort of in the next town, and so they came in to do a little demo at the school, and from my memory is like the whole town is there watching this demo because it was so exciting, and I decided straight away that I wanted to do it. So I think I was like watching the classes and things when I was 3, and then when I look back at the paperwork, the first membership card that I can find is just after I've turned 4, like days after I've turned 4. So it's somewhere in there anyway. And then as I grew up, that was still the only sport that was available. So that's just what I always did. But in the first sort of few months, my dad started coming along to the classes, and he's a bit mouthy, and he was sort of standing down the back saying, oh, this is whatever, who are these dudes? I could do that. And the Shihan, Les Anjos, just turned around to him and said, oh yeah, can you? All right, jump in. And I think he got his butt served to him that day, but he became a teacher in the end. So he trained hard as well, and he ended up running the dojo in our town until I was about 12. And then we had family separation. He moved away, and a couple of years later I took up Taekwondo because that came to town. So I've always just kind of done the thing that was there in front of me because that was the only option. And it's become part of just what I do and who I am without kind of realizing, like, because when you do that at such a young age, you don't realize that, 1, no one else lives like this, and 2, like, it just takes up all the time, especially with my dad teaching. Like every weekend was tournaments and gradings and training camps, and so it's just what I've always done.
Let's look chronologically at the impact of martial arts on you then, and stay with while you were a child. Looking back, you were mentioning to me that you'd found some insights, or you think you'd noticed that it had a huge impact on the way that you were able to have an outlet for having ADHD. I think I'm phrasing that correctly, but if I'm not, I'm sorry to anyone if that is wrong. But let's speak to that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think I was saying to you that I reflect often around some of the things that just would have been a part of my life from doing karate for so long. And in particular, I think about the movement aspect, obviously, and the physiological ability to move things through my body. Of course, I couldn't have named it like that as a kid. But I think I was saying to you, like, I grew up around all the kids that ended up being diagnosed ADHD, and everyone was on Ritalin, and that was sort of the era where that was all happening. And And I don't see myself very differently to all those people that I grew up with, except that I sort of never fell into a crack of diagnosis and getting in trouble. And I just feel like, you know, maybe also because I like reading and writing, so I can put a lot of my attention into the things that you might get picked up through school. But the other aspect of it is that as I was moving all the time in my life, I reckon a lot of the tension that would build up in someone who doesn't have that outlet just kind of, you know, fed away from me. And so I feel like I am a person who just kind of slipped under the radar around that. And I look at my behaviors now and the way I do things, and I'm sure that I would probably still fall into that bracket, but I was able to find enough interests and intention in what I was already doing that it hasn't been a problem like it is for other people. I would say problem in quotation marks, because in my practice, I work with a lot of people with ADHD, and I think they're the coolest of all the people. So I don't think it's a problem, you know, but it's just that getting under the radar of being noticed as though it could be.
Yeah, I have to agree. I don't think he's ever been diagnosed, but I'm certain that my boyfriend has ADHD, and it almost gives him a concentrating superpower in some ways, where once he's fixated on something, he doesn't even notice if someone else is watching him do the thing. He's so absorbed into it, like he gets into flow states so easily. And I'm always astounded by that. I'm just watching him being like, wow, how are you're not getting distracted? I was just sitting there watching you. Didn't you feel my eyes looking at you? And he's like, no, I'm concentrating on me. Go away. Okay, sorry. So I always thought he just had super concentration power, but I think that is what it is, which, you know, we've all got different strengths. It's awesome.
And I think that flow is the thing. I remember so distinctly, like being a kid and doing kata and just being like so in love with the feeling that I had doing it, and that I could just do it for hours and hours, you know, like the perfecting of the form down to the tiniest, minutest bits was so fascinating and exhilarating. And I remember that even being little and thinking, like, obviously not having the same words again, but just having that awareness of like, I'm sure other people don't get into this in the same way, but I really love it.
Yeah, I loved kata too. What about when you got a bit older? So I know you took a bit of a break from martial arts. Is that where we are in the timeline now? So you did taekwondo. Was it then that you took a break and then came back, or?
Yeah, I did taekwondo until I was 18, and I moved, till I was 19, but I moved away from where I'd grown up, where I'd sort of been in that culture, and then came out to Canberra for uni. And I tried pretty much, like, honestly, every martial arts that was in existence in Canberra at the time I tried. I went to every different school, you know, kung fu, eskrima, like aikido, just all different stuff. I was very conscious that I was trying to find the culture, but I also just wanted to train something. I didn't care if it was something different and new, but I just wanted to be, you know, all those things we just talked about, like being in that flow of my body. I just couldn't find it. Like, and you know, listening to a lot of the topics that you've had on the shows, like, yeah, I understand all that. I remember that, like being this 18-year-old girl in a new city and just walking into dojos full of men that were all look like big, scary bikers, which was exactly the kind of men that I'd grown up with. But they were different men that I didn't know, you know, and yet very rarely women, and just not being able to find it. So eventually I just stopped and just went on with uni life. And then I had kids, and after I had my kids, I started realizing that I need to do something. So I started doing like the gym thing and the CrossFit thing, and I'd never done gyms before, so that was all a bit new and exciting. And the gym that I went to CrossFit in was also a judo gym and an MMA gym. So that kind of brought me back into like, oh, that's right. I remember who I am. You know, I remember what I love. And then from there, I did a little bit of training with them. But then we moved out of Canberra we live about an hour and a half away from Canberra in the country again. So I came out here and there was, again, no sports, nothing other than tennis and squash and, you know, those kind of team ball sports. And so I just started training natural movement and got certified in that and started teaching. And then someone asked me to teach some self-defense. And from there, suddenly I had a martial arts school, and that's where I am now. It just kind of all came together.
What is natural movement?
I think of natural movement as the movements that humans have done since the beginning of time, that we do across all cultures, and that don't need a team, don't need a particular piece of equipment, but that we would have to do if we wanted to survive in a natural environment. So that could be climbing, jumping, crawling, rolling. You know, if I want to survive in a natural environment, firstly, I've got to be able to get up off the ground. I've got to be able to walk, like walking is a natural movement. I might have to run, I might have to get away from something. But all those kind of, there's in the middle movements as well, you know, the geometry of being able to bend down or kneel down or squat or things like that. So it sounds really fancy, natural movement, but it really just means the way humans are meant to move.
Yeah. A lot of those things is like, people are like, oh, is there not more than that? Is there not more to it than that? A lot of the things that are related to health that we're probably going to talk about today are very simple and almost natural. Is there anything extra about or different about the motivation to train now compared to when you were younger, or is it the same?
No, that's a really good question. I think it's very different for me. I mean, I started getting into the natural movement specifically because I wanted my kids to be like moving more and moving well. So that was one motivation. I tried to get them into martial arts. I took them to a martial arts school. They did judo for a little while. They were just so not into it. And I think a big part of it was probably what we'll talk about later around that culture of the dojos that we visited. It didn't sell itself to them. They were used to being in an environment where all the adults were really supportive and they had lots of choice and they were informed in what they were doing. So martial arts didn't work for them at the time. So I think I started doing natural movement for that reason. And then in terms of why I train now, like, because they're kind of all, you know, they're teenagers, they're getting older, they've got their own movement practices, you know, they've found their embodiment, which was all I really wanted for them. So now it's me and it's just about staying strong. Like, you know, I don't want to be an old person that can't get up off the ground. Like, I don't want to be a young person that can't get off the ground, you know. That's where it always comes back to, like for example, I might be going, you know, we've got some paddocks and I might, whenever I go across the paddock, I'll duck under the lowest wire and the kids will say, oh my God, Mum, you make everything so hard. And I just say, well, if I can't do it now, I'm not going to be able to do it in another 10 years. So I'll just keep doing it now. You know, little things like that. That's why I train.
Yeah, I love that. And having worked in the physio clinic for 4 or 5 years, I think in the end, I've seen a lot of people who didn't realize that that was a priority until it was not too late, because I don't think it is ever too late. Certainly we've got lots of research backing that up with strength training, for example, but it's harder. Once you've lost it, you've got to get it back. So maintaining it like you're doing now is a very great insight to have had already in your life.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's something I can speak to, because in amongst all of that story, I was very, very sick. And I had like a viral chronic fatigue for 7 years and, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole different story that people can look up if they want. But through that, I got weak. Like, I got unable to move. I got a sore back. I had all these aches and pains. And so I couldn't have just walked into a dojo and started training at the ability that I can now. And I'm certainly still not at the ability that I was when I was 18. I probably never will be. But I needed the time to just rebuild myself through the natural movement practices. But in hindsight, if I'd known what I know now, I would never have stopped moving. I would never have stopped squatting and ducking under paddocks and things, because even if I'd still been sick, it wouldn't have been as difficult to get back to the level of strength and, you know, fitness and all that stuff that I've got now.
Yeah. So let's talk about Motion Ninja Academy, because I think it's such a cool marriage of experiences that you've had to lead towards starting that dojo compared to what we see as one of the common pathways to being a teacher in martial arts, which is often starts martial arts, gets to a high level of proficiency, often competing and fighting, high level of success in competition. And then as you start to wane off of that, you look to what's the next step in your career. And that's often logically teaching. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. There are a lot of fantastic coaches out there that really look into how to be better coaches, but that's not always the case. And sometimes it's just, this is what worked for me, and I'm used to this hierarchy. I'm telling you this, and therefore you're going to do this. And, you know, it's not considering how do I be a better teacher and having that kind of mindset, just like these people had when they were asking the question, how do I become a more effective fighter? So you've had the influence of working as a counsellor. So, of course, we can speak to that in a bit. I think we're going to circle back around to that. But that influence, then being a martial artist in through a family and having your own kids as well, and seeing, you know, what worked and didn't work for them. What are the other influence that you drew upon in terms of creating this style of teaching this hybrid martial art, this mixed martial art that's standing?
Yeah, standing mixed martial art. We're gonna get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think how do I answer that, Georgia? As I started to as the things started to fall into place where I was teaching, you know, first doing a self-defense class for teenagers and then also running adult movement and just watching what was happening with the adults that were coming in, then starting to work with the littler kids and just really reflecting on how it was done before to how it's done, how I thought it could be done now. I was very aware that there's no way that we can teach in the way that I was taught in the 80s. Like, you know, when I bring my kids down to the river, I'm not picking them up and physically throwing them into the river if they don't want to go. But that happened to me in the ocean when I was like 6, you know. So that shit's not going to fly anymore in this culture. And I wouldn't want to do that. Like, you know, for me, it's all because I do work as a counsellor, I really rate like relational trust and rapport with people. And so, you know, I can bring in 10 kids that are all off the charts and they can't focus and they're all yelling and someone bumps someone and then they think it's the end of the world and they want to punch on in the middle of class. And like I can come down on them and I can scream at them and tell them that that's the wrong thing, and I can give them all push-ups and they won't do them properly anyway. And, you know, they'll just come back and do the same thing in 5 minutes. Or I can find a different way to build rapport with them and really help them understand what's going on for them specifically and physiologically. So that's kind of what I just set out to do, because I knew that giving people push-ups doesn't work. Like everyone knows how kids do push-ups. What's the point? You know? So one of the first things I did was develop what I call a spear jump. And it's just a different movement that involves the whole body, and there's a jump in there and there's a bend, and just to straight up change the way that we do this. Like, now you're going to do this exercise. Like, I wanted to take the meanness out of push-ups, because I think it's not even just in martial arts, you know, footballers, everyone gets told like go and do push-ups as some sort of punishment. So I wanted to remove punishment completely for adults and kids. And then just trying to work out, well, what's going on for these people, you know, what is informing what's going on for each of these individuals. And with some of my adults, it might be trauma, but with some of my kids, it might just be anxiety, or it might be that they've never been given in a situation where they have informed choice. So what if I just speak to them like a regular human and I give them some choices? You want to do spear jumps, or do you want to just sit out for a while? Choice. Like, either way, let's just see what happens for you, you know. And it's just been it's all an experiment, you know. And every time I think I know what works, then I get some other new person in that totally turns it all upside down. I'm going to think about it again. But the overall is just like, how do I make it an informed choice for them, rather than me, like you said, oh, this worked for me, so therefore that's how we do it. Because the world's different. It's just, and it was different then, actually. It was different in the 80s. It wasn't the right thing to be doing then either. But now I get to make those choices myself. Like, I get to make the decisions because I'm the boss lady.
Yeah, tell us about the school. For children, what does a class look like? What are the things they're doing?
All right. So the classes are pretty much the same across the board, teach children or adults. Mm-hmm. One of the very first things is different probably than most other dojos is that we circle round instead of standing in lines. So the classes can't be too big. We have to all be able to circle around. So we try to keep it maximum 10, but some of those are blowing out at the moment. Circle around so that there's equality and everyone can see each other, and, you know, I can see everyone because when you're holding that space, you know, it helps to be able to see what's going on for each person, not what everyone's doing, but what's going on for them. You know, like, is that kid unable to make eye contact at the moment, or you know, is that lady like sort of looking like her kicks are getting not as strong, or they're getting really strong all of a sudden, or so that I can see what's going on in the class. I think I really like that. Also, we train outside, so I always have my little chalk like spray chalk can, and I just draw up a dojo. We've got a little like a fitness playground that's got some monkey bars and some little bits and pieces. So that's how we bring in the natural movement elements as well as the martial arts. So I guess in a traditional martial arts, you know, you're coming in, you're doing your warm up, you're doing a heap of techniques, and then you spar at the end. That's kind of, you know, the basic framework. Whereas we're coming in, we're doing a bit of groundwork to warm up. We might play a game, particularly with the kids, we play a lot of games. And then we might do some techniques that are more the natural movement side. So the jumping or the crawling. I really like crawling. I like crawling because it works the left and right side of the brain together. And it's something that kids, even if they don't do it well, they feel confident in it. Yeah. Whereas if I ask them to do punches and kicks, they might not be confident straight away. So we'll usually do an obstacle course, then we'll do some technique. We might bring our martial arts technique into the obstacle course. And then I'm just getting to the point where I've got a few kids that are ready to start sparring. So we do a little bit of sparring at the end for the more advanced kids. But so I guess it looks different in the sense that we're probably doing different moves than what you'd see in most other gyms. And then we're doing some of the things that you would always see.
You spoke about looking out for anxiety in kids rather than looking out for trauma. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think they are kind of the same thing. This is like, that's probably a controversial thing to say. So all of my work, whether it's in counselling or coaching, is, you know, looking through a filter of the polyvagal theory. I'm not sure if you've talked about that on the podcast as such.
Give us an explanation now, because people might have missed the episodes where we have touched on it.
Okay, so I would usually explain that as polyvagal theory just tells us that there's many branches in our nervous system that control whether we feel unsafe or safe. And it's an alarm signal that happens before our brain can come on board. So if I'm in an environment, the other part probably that's important to understand is that that signaling system looks for cues from inside of us, outside of us, and between us. So by between us, I mean between you and I, if we're in relationship in that moment. So if I'm in the dojo, you know, kind of round circle situation, and something in the environment feels a bit threatening to me, that might trigger my nervous system to go into what we know as fight or flight, or maybe even freeze, right? A shutdown response, depending on how anxious I am. So whether I have trauma or I don't, and, you know, that's a whole other conversation of what is trauma. But regardless, I can still have the same sort of responses in my nervous system to anxiety as I would if there was a traumatic experience that was making that happen, yeah, or that was still sitting inside my body. So trauma-informed is the new funky term that everyone uses, and it's definitely exciting because we're all starting to think about it. But underlying trauma-informed, I just think that it's anxiety-informed, and I don't like to focus only on trauma, because when you're talking about kids, what am I going to say to a parent? Like, oh, your kid's nervous system is really triggered right now. He must have some trauma. Like, that's just, that's very disrespectful, and it misses the whole point of informed choice, yeah? So just to say, like, okay, I can see there's some anxiety here. There could be any number of reasons. It could be because they had surgery when they were 1 year old and they're carrying trauma. Or it could just be they had a shitty day at school and the kid that was a bit mean to them is sitting on the other side of the circle right now from them, and they're feeling a little distressed in the environment. Either way, I need to respond in the same way, which is to make sure they can feel safe, they're secure, and that they have choice.
Yeah, I love it. It kind of reminds me of how Sean Desjardins, who we had on the show quite a while ago, his school is mindful martial arts instead of trauma-informed martial arts. And I love that name too. I think it's really, really good. Let's talk about your work as a counsellor and how that's come in. So what do you do? Who do you normally see? What kind of clientele do you work with?
Sure. Yeah. Because I live in a small town, I say that I see everyone, and I do.
Mm-hmm.
I have clients from 4 to 84 at the moment. But what I really like to see is the anxiety underlying cases. And as it turns out, that's pretty much everyone that comes to counselling in one way or another. So it's pretty broad. I don't I don't niche down into one particular age group or anything like that. Because when I'm working with a polyvagal lens, it's the same response to everyone, really. You know, everyone's got the same type of nervous system. It's just our experiences that make it shaped and responsive the way it is. But what I do notice, and I think this is what you're trying to get to in the practice, is that when I sit down and look at my books, at least 80% of the people at any one time have got a really significant history of domestic and family violence in their story, whether it's current, like whether it's something that's happening in their lives right now, or whether it's, from their family of origin, and it's still the patterns of and the cycles of losing control and having people control them could still be showing up in their lives. And I reflect on that a lot about, because I have a lot of training in domestic violence. Do I just have a bias to seeing that? When people come in, do I hear their story and decide, oh, that's domestic violence? But so I'm constantly reflecting on that and constantly checking in with my notes and with my training. And I don't think it's a bias. I think it's really there. I think the problem is that a lot of, maybe not the problem, but maybe the reason that other people don't see it is because they don't have the training to see all those little pieces and to name it in that way, So I don't think it's just the people I see. I think it's across the board. And I also believe that, so if I say 80 to 90% of my people have that history, there's probably that 20 or 10% that maybe we just haven't had enough discussion to find it yet. Because I think that culturally it's everywhere,
The statistics being, before COVID, 1 in 3 women having experienced domestic violence and 1 in 3 children. And of course, well, not of course, but we expect that has risen since COVID. That's only the reported numbers as well. So how much higher that really is. And I think there is a disconnect between that number does shock some people when they hear it, but some people, they do know it, but then you almost don't make the connection, like if in any given room, how many people have been influenced by that. It almost just feels like a statistic, and you forget that there's so many flow-on effects from that. And if it's 1 in 3 at any given time, then the likelihood that somebody in a room has experienced it this time, someone at this time, someone who knows someone and therefore has been impacted by it, it's overwhelming to think about. And I think, yeah, it makes me lost for words, honestly. It's terrible.
Yeah, agreed. I couldn't say it better. And it's not like people come in to see me because they know that I'm domestically violence counselling trained and that's what we're going to talk about. A lot of the time that's not what they come to. They might be coming in for grief, or they're having issues with their partner, but they're not thinking that it's a domestic violence situation. And so I never say to someone like, oh, do you realize that your partner's doing domestic violence to you? Like, that's certainly not the way to go about it. But as their story starts to unfold, and I can say to them maybe something like, oh, I'm going to read you a couple of principles or a couple of ideas and tell me if that fits your relationship. And so I'll just pull out some of the terms around control and manipulation and threat and not feeling safe at home, and they'll say yeah, and then I'll show them the piece of paper and say, that you've just described domestic violence, so let's talk about that. And it's shocking to people because people don't think that and I say people because it's not always women either, people don't realize and don't like to think that they could be the person who's having violence done to them. And I think that speaks to our culture too, that it's so, power and domination and control is so insidious in so much of our culture that we can just be involved with it without even realizing and noticing how it's affecting us. But once we do, then we get to change it, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whenever I feel overwhelmed and sad about the state of the world, the fact that our nervous system is plastic is kind of the thing that I'm like, yes, like there is always hope, and I think, I wonder if the reason why that is that people don't realize it too is that we're oftentimes holding on to that childhood belief that things are our own fault too. So, that children making themselves the center of the world because that's how their brain is set up, and then thinks, well, I'm bad, that's why this is happening to me, or whatever it might be. And that really, most of the time, it's very unlikely that you're going to have super healthy attachments and grow up with great ideas about yourself that you move past that to having a more broad lens. We keep ourselves like children at the center of the world and make things our own fault. And therefore, if violence is being done to me, it's because I'm not strong enough, brave enough, you know, good enough, whatever the blame that we put onto ourselves might be as a society.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I hear, and that's the hardest thing. And that's a hard thing for people to get past. Like, you know, I think the statistics of a woman leaving a domestic violence situation is that she'll leave 7 times before she actually leaves forever. And that's pretty mind-blowing to people. But the reason is because those relationships are so complex. Like, you don't fall in love with someone because they're violent to you. You fall in love with them because of all the good things you see. And they can still be there even when there's control and domination there. So then when you start saying all those things like, oh, it must be me, it must be my fault. And it's like, we're complicated humans. It's not black and white ever, you know. But I agree with you that the plasticity is the exciting thing. And going back to the stuff around the kids in the classes, that's what keeps me focused there too, because like, what can I do for this little, not even always little, but any of those humans in my classes? What can I do for them in this instant that's going to give their nervous system a little cue, a little message that the world is actually okay right now? And what will that do on a broader scale to them or for them? Yeah.
What are some of the impacts that the program that you're running has had on people? Do you have any examples?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yeah, I would say just that level of more groundedness, and you know, it's probably not anything different to what other dojos find with people who stay. I think I probably have a higher staying rate. You know, I don't know what the stats on that are, but I reckon that I do, because most kids that start don't leave, and none of my adults have left. So I think that says something in terms of, you know, what's happening for their nervous systems. And then what's developed there is that sense of groundedness and trust. I just ran a program over the holidays with a bunch of my more advanced kids. And by advanced, it just means they've graded at least once, you know. But there's a group of kids there with all different ages, and some of those young people did not have the ability to be in the same space without getting edgy before. Like, they would just have different personalities. And we ran a whole day program where by the end of it, they were all laughing and spraying each other with water, and like, yeah, like beautiful, like just so cool. And, you know, all the parents ring and say, oh my gosh, they had such a great time, we have to do this again. And so that's the sort of thing that I see, that just these kids that maybe didn't feel very safe in the world are finding places where they feel safer. That's all I want, really. I don't care what techniques they do in between that.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. That is so, so, so beautiful. I'm just going to quickly look to my notes because I don't want to miss some of the things that I wanted to talk about. Let's go back to women.
Can I read you a message that someone sent me last night before class?
Yes, please.
I haven't asked her if I can, but I'm sure she won't mind. She says, so she does my movement class, and it was her first time coming to the adult martial arts class, right? So I have a separate class that's just movement. Mm-hmm. She says, I'm coming to ninja class today. Heads up, I'm a bit shaky and will likely cry at some point, but so the fuck, what if I do, right? It's 2021, ninjas can be strong and cry and panic and kick ass and have boobs and curves in whatever places they happen to be. And I just was like, oh yes, they can, and yes, you can. And I wanted to share that with you, because when I read it, I was like, oh, that's Georgia. Like, that's what she's talking about. And this lady, she doesn't know any of that. She hasn't come across you or heard about the podcast or anything. So it's there, right? People want that. Like, they're feeding off that. And for me, with that particular person, it just feels like this is why I'm doing it. I've been able to provide a space that she can step into that. And, you know, if she's my one new person of the year, it doesn't even matter, because that one person is going to get so much out of it.
Yeah, exactly. That is the whole reason why we do it, right?
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you're right. I mean, that kind of leads in well. What about women's circles? So that's something that you mentioned. Can you explain this concept of women needing a circle? And I'm going to let you speak to that because I'm going to butcher it.
Okay. So women's circles, I guess, is a movement that's been around, well, forever, really. Women have been meeting in circles, in spaces that are exclusive to women, probably since the beginning of human time. And it's the work that I've done for the last sort of 15, 20 years in amongst all of, like before I was doing the martial arts again, I've always been doing this. And for me, it's always been providing a space for women to meet where they can say anything that comes up, whether it's anger, whether it's, you know, carrying shame. It's a space where the things that we don't talk about in everyday life get to be said, you know, and so we hold it very confidentially. We usually make the space really beautiful so it feels really welcoming, you know, going back to that nervous system thing of finding cues outside of ourselves and inside of ourselves and between us. So we develop that space in a sacred way, you know, we call it sacred space, so that a person entering the space feels like it's a safe place to be and that they can speak. And then hopefully it's held by a facilitator that's able to continue that feeling and that sense of informed choice, you know, authenticity, integrity. And we just, depending on what the theme is, it might just develop from there. But that's something where I've just heard the most heartbreaking and the most uplifting and the most inspiring stories. And you never know what you're going to get, which I think is probably why I've been addicted to it for so long as a facilitator, because there's always something that, and when one woman speaks in a circle, everyone gets something from it. You know, it's like, if I share my vulnerability, probably you have a bit of that vulnerability too. And maybe you never got to speak about it, but hearing me speak about it allows you to know that you're not alone. And so then maybe you speak about it, or maybe you don't, but there's a camaraderie and a sisterhood, right? It's probably a much better word than camaraderie. And that then uplifts women, it gives them confidence, it gives them empowerment. And I always have said that we don't know what we do in that circle, how that ripples out to everywhere else that woman goes from then on. You know, my mentor used to say, like, we're like spot fires. A women's circle is a spot fire. And then after that breaks apart, you know, all those little spots of fire go out everywhere and they light up other places. And we eventually get this whole, I know that's not the best image for us a year on, but we get this whole glowing beauty of women empowered. Yeah.
How does that relate then into martial arts? So do you have women's circles within the school or women's only classes, or what do you do?
Yeah, I haven't had to specify that they're women's classes. My movement class in the mornings is all just women, and we've never had any men show up. So we treat that as women's circle. And some of the things I do in my class is all of my classes, we have sort of in our warm-up phase, we'll be sharing about either how our day was or what's bothering us, or, you know, just those kind of general things. But it's held. It's not just people chatting for the sake of chatting. And then at the end of the class, we come back together in our circle and we'll say, look to the person next to us and tell them something good that they've done today. And it could be, you know, oh my gosh, like particularly with the women's class, I can't believe that you did all those squats while carrying the 3-month-old baby who was crying, you know. So we're very open to having kids at all the classes. Or for the little kids, it's, you know, oh, you did so well when you jumped over that hurdle that was really high, you know. So they're speaking to each other, but then they also say something that they've done well and something that they're intending to work on. And that might not even be something in class. It might be, you know, I want to get in my garden every day or whatever. But it just, it brings that community together. Even though we're just a group of people training together, there's a community and an intentionality there. And one of the things that in that women's class, they say a lot is that they feel that inclusion very much. Like, doesn't matter what shape their body is, like how fit they are, they instantly feel included because we're all purposely making eye contact and, you know, we're scaling and all those sorts of obvious things that we need to do for people who are moving. But there's no judgment in that space because I don't leave room for it. I don't allow it. It just doesn't exist.
I love the idea of what did somebody else do well. One of the things we do at the end of all of my classes is we go around and say, you know, what went well, what were you proud of, what was just something good from today. And it's funny, some women are like, you know, this is the hardest part of class for me, is trying to tell you something that I did well. Like they really struggle, but I think it's really important and just because I note it down. And when I look at how their answers change as they progress through the program, it's really quite beautiful. But I love the idea of what did somebody else do well. So for any of my clients that are listening, we might try that. And I don't know if you guys do this. I'm trying to make it a really big thing. But in Legally Blonde 2, you know, she has the snap cup. I don't know if you've seen it, but they have this cup and everyone has to write a compliment in it, and everyone, you put it in and she pulls them out and reads out the compliments. Which is pretty much just like the same thing that we're doing at the end of class. But after everyone says the nice thing, there was always this kind of awkward pause of everyone being like, that's awesome, good job. And it kind of felt a bit clunky. So I decided, I was like, we're going to do snaps. You know, like clip your fingers and be like, snaps for Georgia.
Hi.
So anyway, so to my clients, to the snaps, we're definitely going to trial adding what did somebody else, or what did you notice somebody else do well? And we'll see how it goes if you like it.
That's great.
So what else do we need to be mindful of for women? I'm alluding to, because I'm so excited to get into this topic, women's cycles are now known as the 6th vital sign listed by the World Health Association. They're super important. What can we learn about ourselves from our bleeds?
Everything. Firstly, I mean, from a training perspective, we can just learn that there's nothing in nature that goes 100% of the time. You know, there's an up cycle and there's a rest cycle, and that has been missing in women's sport forever. And we have the opportunity as leaders, like as women who are teaching women, to really make sure that that's remembered and addressed. So for example, in my classes, I always know where everyone's at, all the women, where they're at in their cycle. And if this week we had a lady come up, she arrived late, she was kind of tired, she's kind of all over the place. And I said, are you okay? And she said, it's the first day of bleeding, I nearly didn't come. And so I just scaled for her, right? She didn't do anything like the rest of the class, but she could still be involved and she was still included. But, you know, where everyone else was doing a squat, she was using a chair and she was slowly putting her hands down and she was just resting herself back and exposing her belly and giving her womb a bit of a rub, and then she was kind of standing back up. So it doesn't sound very productive, but you know what? It doesn't have to be productive then, because that's a rest cycle. Your body is bleeding, it's getting rid of everything it doesn't need. There's no space for us to try to build on top of that. The best thing we can do is support it to do what it's trying to do, which is to process everything out that doesn't need to be there. Take a little bit of regenerative time, because then when we do that, in another week, we'll be like so strong and so ready to go. But if we don't take that rest, then it's like always pushing shit up a hill, right? There's just no way to keep going because you're just drained all the time. Does that answer your question? I went on a bit of a tangent.
No, it answers part of my question. I want to dig right into this. So if someone's looking at their cycle, how do you map your training around that? So while you're bleeding, take it more easy, and then the rest of the time is all go, 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 or is there more nuance to it than that?
Okay. So it's hard without having any visuals, but we'll just try to get everyone to think about a map of a circle. So you've got a circle in front of you. At the top of the circle is like a compass. It's north. So therefore at the bottom is south. We've got east and west. I'm going to speak from a southern hemisphere perspective. So anyone that's listening in America, just have to flip it. Message me and I'll explain it to you in your language. But obviously I teach Australian people, and so that's how I do it. So on that circle, we've got this compass directions, we've got this map, and we know that in the world, in the southern hemisphere, the sun rises in the east, and then it comes up through the day, it expands and gets most intense when it's at the north of us, so it's above us, if we go on that sort of way of thinking about a map. And then of course it comes down to the west, and down in the south part, like that bottom half of the circle, it's dark, there's no sun, right? That's the time where there is the space where there's no sun at all. So that, if you just imagine that in your mind, where you've got your circle and the sun the light starts to brighten on the right hand side on the east, all the way across the top and across to the left-hand side is all bright. But underneath that, the other half is dark. Does that make sense, Georgia?
I'm following.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm so picturing.
Now,
so if I look like I'm wandering off, it's because I'm there.
Yeah. Just want to check that you are there. So now if we think that, right, that's how the sun goes every single day, and nature reflects that cycle in everything that it does. So the moon has the same sort of cycle where it's dark at one point and then it's really bright at the other point. We could map that on this same thing. So right at the bottom where the south is and where it's dark is a dark moon. And then if we go up towards the east, we've got a quarter of a moon, which looks like a half. It's a bit weird languaging. And then at the top, we've got the full moon. Yeah, so that's the brightest phase. So again, we've got this bright half and a dark half underneath. A moon cycle goes for about 28 days. And so does overall, most of the time, broadly speaking, a women's menstrual cycle goes about 28 days. Obviously, we're all moving in and out of that a bit, but just as a teaching device, we're going to say that it's a 28-day cycle. So if we were to use that same map, we would reflect that, well, let's go up to the top, excuse me, at the top where it's very bright and intense, that would be the place of ovulation. Yeah, so think about in your womb, there's an egg getting ready, there's all this delicious, nourishing growth ready to hold that egg when it implants because it will get fertilized and a little baby can grow there. That's happening to us every single month, right? Every 28 days that happens. And that's at the top because that's peak energy. It's like, it's the fruit of our womb. Just, we could map this same sort of map and we could put a plant on there where the seed starts to grow, it sprouts, it has a fruit at the top, and then it decays and it dies off. All its leaves fall down, the fruit falls down, and then it has a dormant period at the bottom of the map. So we'll get our ovulation at the top, and then same, if the egg isn't implanted and if there's no fertilization that happens there, then all of that nourishing goodness that grew in your uterus just to hold this possible baby has to get out of your body and get stripped away. So your body goes through the process of letting it all go. Your size changes, all that stuff that we call bloating, like it's actually amazing nourishment that's going on inside of us. And so that western side of our map, things are starting to strip away, break away, and our body's going through like this huge regenerative kind of process to get rid of all of that nourishing, beautiful stuff that was holding the egg. And then the bleeding happens. So that's at the bottom of the map. The bleeding happens where our body doesn't want to do anything. It just did all this amazing work and it's time for a bit of rest. Yeah. As soon as it's finished the bleed, as soon as all of those bits of beautiful, nourishing stuff are gone, then it starts to prepare for the next cycle. And we get this increase of energy. We feel like inspired and ready to go. We feel stronger, more motivated, and we work our way up to that ovulation phase again. So to answer your question about how do we map our training on that, it's the exact same thing. When there's that dormant period, we want to go slow, we want to go easy. We might want to just focus on technique or, do a lot more mobility work, things that are going to be regenerative for our body. But then as we start to hit those, the first half a week after our bleed, we're going to have such a surge of energy, and all that energy will go on for, another 2 weeks. And that's when we go hard. We can build so much more muscle, all of those things that is kind of what Western martial arts has become. Yeah, the go, strong. That's where that phase is. Yeah. But then there has to come a time where we'll let go a bit of that and we get to sort of reflect, so we can reflect back and look at all the things we've just done, how useful they were, what do I want to do in my next part of my cycle. That preparing to bleed and bleed phase is a perfect time to do that. So we can, if we map our training alongside our actual bleeding cycle, then we'll actually be a hell of a lot more productive, and like strength will build faster, focus will be so much easier, and you just won't be as fucking tired as you usually are when you're training.
Yeah, it's amazing to me because I have gone through a crazy journey related to my cycles, starting with being on the pill and the influence of that, and then losing my period because I was underweight for many years fighting, and then it coming back because I wanted to bring it back. I recognized that there was something incredibly significant missing from my life, and then now working through getting everything into balance again. And the more I started asking the questions for me, the more I started noticing with my female clients that the times when they would have just like unexplained inability to hit the lifts that they were hitting before and things like that, and getting really hard on themselves and being, I just don't know what's wrong. I don't know why I can't hit this today. And at first I would look and be, thinking, well, it must be some kind of training variable that I had like not programmed in enough rest, or maybe I'm not we increased the weight too quickly or something. And then once I started asking those questions, without fail, every single time they would ask, or they would say, oh, I just don't know why, I just don't feel right. And I would say, you got your period? And every single time, yes. Nobody would put two and two together to be like, maybe that might be the reason why I can't push myself 100% right now. And there's so much shame that comes with that too. There's so much, I'm losing a week and like I'm slipping backwards. And even from a programming perspective, for exercise science nerds out there, there's versions of programming where we would look at starting with this much load. Oh, I'm using my hands, we're on a podcast. Starting with a moderate load, increasing the load the next week, increasing the load to above maximum the next week. That's called functional overreaching. And then having a deload week the following week. Yeah. Imagine. Yeah. Very well suited if anyone actually followed it. But yeah, I think it's really, really cool to start thinking about that and to start looking at it like a good thing, like a blessing, right? Have you looked much into some of the benefits that you have within your body while you're, not just the fact that we go through this cycle, but in each of the different phases, some of the like superpowers that women might get?
That's a good question. Well, one thing I'll say, just kind of referring back to what you were saying, at the kind of middle of week 3 is when we say like everything that's not working shows up. Yeah. And that's usually that thing that they call PMS, where like everything's too hard. I hate my husband. My kids never get ready for school on time. Like just the whole world is ending. Right. And I think that's a superpower, to realize like when that's going on, oh, hang on. Like you said, do you have your period, or is it coming? And then being able to say, okay, so I'm getting this very clear message from the world around me that shit's not right. And now I've got the phase where I can deal with that. I can reflect on what has worked, what hasn't. I can plan to change, So for me, like the superpower overall of the whole cycle is that plasticity, the ability to keep checking in and being able to shift and change based on your dreams and your intentions. That darker phase is the place where we put the seeds in. So we can be with ourselves and dream it. So it doesn't matter whether you are a mum that's just doing a bit of training because you want to stay healthy, or you're a professional fighter. You can still use the same rhythm to say, okay, well, this is the time where I'm planning and like deloading. All those things are built in there. So there's probably superpowers, in each of those phases, but overall it's just the tuning in and being in flow with what's going on for you. If some people will have a cycle where they bleed at the same time as the dark moon, so that becomes really easy for us to follow our own tracking and our own flow, because we'll have this matching cycle like I was explaining before. But a lot of women, and I find a lot of hard-hitting, go-getting women bleed on the full moon. So we'll have the world around us will be reflecting one sort of map and one cycle, one pattern, and our own internal structure will be flipped. So when everything else is saying go, 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 our body says, hang on, stop. Yeah. And so I think that's a superpower in really owning your own everything, like who I'm going to be when I train, what that's going to look like, what my aims and targets are going to be, that I'm not, I'm not directed by anything else. I'm just going to go into myself and let that be the direction. And that's huge for women who are at the upper echelons of training, because there might be people around who don't understand what we're talking about right now. And so to be able to show up and say, no, I'm, like when I used to train in a CrossFit gym, I would always, whenever I was bleeding, I'd just say, no, I'm bleeding, I'm not doing that. And the look on the men's faces would just be absolute horror, because one, I don't even know what you mean. And two, you can't say that, it's a big deal for us to start naming that, but we have to, we just have to, if we want to see women's, imagine the potential of women in athletic and training situations if we were to be using this pattern and this mapping for ourselves.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's cool that you mentioned with the flow. So I know from reading the book In the Flow by Alyssa Vitti, who is a great author, an incredible advocate for cycle syncing. And she does talk about, some of the physiological impacts of those different phases. So like you spoke about getting insights from when you're, in quotation marks, PMSing and noticing all the bad things that are happening. Well, then when you bleed, the neural activity in your brain across the corpus callosum, which is the rift, the hemisphere or the valley between the left and right hemisphere, is at maximum talking across the valley. So your left and right hemisphere speak to each other much more than they would at any other time, and sounds like braggy, but much more than men's ever do. And it means that you've got a superpower of reflection. Similarly, when you're ovulating, you're absolutely magnetic. That's an incredible time to do social things and talk to people, where you've got a hormonal boost. When you are just after ovulating, and hopefully, because mine doesn't do this yet, but if you've got a healthy cycle and your progesterone spikes after you ovulate, which is another hormone that people forget oftentimes, you're very task oriented, and so you can get a lot of shit done during that phase of the cycle. Whereas when you're in your follicular stage, which is just after you bleed is when your brain is really primed for starting to implement all of the things that you thought about. So more planning oriented, whereas while you're bleeding is a great time, like you said, for reflection and thinking about what's going on in the world around you, what's going on in your world, and what could be different. And yeah, this is a topic I could speak a lot about, but I think even just starting to replace your awareness and tracking when your cycle is and thinking about what you do and don't want to do is really the start of stopping blaming yourself for not being able to follow what we call a circadian rhythm, which is wake up, peak testosterone wanes throughout the day, and this cycle that we've built our whole industries around, right? The 9 to 5 is really set up for the male hormone and looks the same every single day, apart from the fact that we have weekends, but that doesn't really align with anyone's hormonal cycle, a 7-day cycle that I know of. So yeah, it's cool to start thinking about.
There is some stuff out there about, the rhythm is very exciting to me. That's something that I work a lot with. I actually have a diary that I've created where that everything you're just speaking about is kind of built into the diary. So as you go through a moon cycle, when it's a good time to get out in the world, it tells you. When it's a time to look into yourself, it tells you, all that sort of thing. But there is some, obviously there's a lot of stuff around circadian rhythms at the moment, but also that 7-day cycle rhythm is something that people are talking about. I just can't remember what the name for it is right now. If I can find it in my notes, I'll send it to you, because I was just like, yes, this is all the pieces are coming together, cyclically. So that's exciting.
Wow. I know that the 28-day cycle is called an infradian rhythm, but I don't know what a 7-day cycle would be called, but very, very, very cool.
Yeah. And when you look at, the 28 days, you split it into 4, then you've got the 7. So they're in there. Yeah. It's super cool. If people want to know about rhythm, there's plenty of links that I can provide for people about that and just understanding that. But I think what you said about for women to start tracking your cycle and start tracking the things that are important to you. Like if what you eat is important, then track what it is that you want to eat at those times. Not what it is that you're forcing yourself to eat, but what is it that you want to eat. Or if sleep's important, then track how tired am I, or how well am I not sleeping or sleeping? Because a menstrual cycle is one of many cycles in our body, right? And one of many ways that we can read it. But it all comes back to this idea of being embodied and understanding ourselves. And that's something that women have got to practice a lot more still.
Absolutely.
Overall.
Yeah, definitely. And I think around food, one of the things that we just spoke about on the last episode with Leah was around carbohydrates, right? And there's this big movement towards ketogenic diets and removing whole food groups, and I was all for it. I was strictly keto. Well, not strictly keto, but I was very low carb for a very long time and very high energy output. And I believed that ketosis was the future of living a longer life because, you know, you were going to reduce inflammation and improve mitochondrial health and have longer telomeres and, you know, all of the deepest biohacking science. I thought I was all over it, and my hormones were completely tanked. And the reason is that we need carbohydrates. And not only do we need carbohydrates, women need to have some fat on them. So this really, really lean body that is starting, you know, that is quite popular with the strong is the new skinny and like Fitspo type thing, which is still like a very, very lean body type, is maybe not that healthy for your hormones or your cycle. And you can tell if you don't have a 28-day cycle, you could be too lean. And you'll know if that is the thing. So it's definitely worth thinking about too, making sure you are giving your body enough food, because women do need more calories than I think they think, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say, I mean, you might not have a 28-day cycle, you might have a 26-day cycle, but it's the regularity that we're looking for, right? Yes. So I always want to make sure that women understand it doesn't matter whether you bleed with the full moon or the dark moon, or you have 26 days or even 42 days. If you've had 42 days every month for 6 years, it might be okay for you. That's probably just right. Like, again, it comes down to informed ability to understand ourselves. But the rhythm is what we're looking for, something that has that regular rhythm, and we can really we can train that within ourselves. Another way to work with that is with light as well. So if we don't have a very regular cycle, we might want to start thinking about, well, am I getting light at the right time of the day? Am I getting dark at the right time of the day? And sort of starting to match that. But on a broader scale, am I having bright light during a full moon and less light during a dark moon? Because in an ancestral context, that's how we would have lived, right? There would have been periods of the month where the world was brighter and where the world was darker. So there are ways that you can like start to it's ways to notice for ourselves about what's going on.
Yeah, really, really cool. I hadn't even thought about the impact of light on the cycle. Certainly I thought about it for sleep, but I've never thought about it for cycle. I'm definitely going to start looking more into that now. I know I've thought about the idea, they call it like moon bathing, where you go out and look at the moon every night to try and encourage your cycle to sink towards sort of one way or the other, so your body knows what's going on with the moon. But I love that. That's a really, really cool, like you said, ancestral model way of looking at that. Let's talk about some of your work on the board for, I am going to forget the name of the charity, but the charity work that you're doing around domestic violence. Talk to us about that.
Okay, so the town I live in is called Braidwood. Mm-hmm. And so the group that you're talking about is Braidwood Says No to Violence. And that was something that I came into when I was doing my counselling training. That local group was sort of sitting there already, and they were just trying to work on projects that could address domestic violence in the community. It's a small community, but yet we're close. It's a weird situation where we're close enough to services in bigger cities, like country cities, but at the same time we can access them, but we don't have anything in the town, right? Mm-hmm. So the question was around, could we have our own shelter, or these huge big projects that were weren't really going to work. But what we sort of have got to over the time is realizing that the best thing we could do for now in terms of working around violence in the community is to educate everyone in the community. So I sit as the chair of that committee. Last year we didn't do a lot because of all the reasons why everyone else didn't do a lot. But before that we were doing a lot of educational lectures and workshops where we were inviting particular groups in. So our first one was around all the businesses in town, and we went down the main street and directly invited each sort of owner of the business and said, look, we just want to provide information about what it is that you would be, how would you know if someone came into your business and they were being impacted by domestic violence, and what would you do about it? Because most people care. Like, there's not many people that would just be like, oh, I don't want to know about that, fuck that, People care, particularly when you say it's women or children that are being impacted. So we did this series of lectures where I would just speak about you know, how to recognize domestic violence, really getting people to question their bias and some of the mythology, you know, things like boys will be boys, and that, you know, she's mouthy, so she deserves it. All of that shit, we just got it out of the way, and really got people to think more broadly about not only what domestic violence impacted people would look like, but how it's affecting the community overall. You know, so one example I like to use is if the school teacher of your child is impacted by violence at home, and then she comes to school and she's having a difficult day, that impacts another 30 kids, and then that impacts another 30 families. And, you know, so just the education was just around helping people understand how important it is that we get on top of domestic violence as a culture and a community. And then also, like, how would you respond to someone? So if somebody did come into your business, or if your friend did disclose to you that she was in a violent situation, what would you do? Because most people want to just say, oh, you need to leave, get out of there, like, you know, go to the shelter, whatever the options are. But a lot of the time it's not that simple. You know, there's all these safety things to think about. And so educating people about those and helping them understand why someone mightn't leave, why they mightn't disclose. And then, because obviously none of these people are practitioners, they're just regular people in the community, then educating them about how to refer, like where would you send someone to, you know, and so all of that sort of thing. So then we provided lists of, you know, who people could refer to, and like community outreach and all that sort of thing. So it was an exciting project in the sense that it started out of a need, but as we developed it, we actually, what we found out about the needs were reflected by the community. Like, we didn't just come in and go, right, this is what we need to do. It really was a back and forth kind of thing, and lots of workshopping and stuff like that. So this year we would like to extend that work. But for me, it's difficult, Georgia, because, like, firstly, I work as a counsellor. So I'm sometimes in a small town, the situations can be a little close. So I have to be careful as sitting on the board as well, that, you know, like someone might come in and say, oh, so-and-so is, you know, being bashed by their wife or whatever. Hollie, you got to do something about it. Can you see her? And there's just complexities there. There's always lots and lots of, aspects to that. And so overall, I think it's important that we exist, because if nothing else, we have provided a voice that says that violence isn't okay in the community. And on a personal level, I really like that I sit in that group of people who says violence isn't okay, and then I teach people how to fight, because that's more complexity that people have to get their head around, you know?
Yeah, because I think we've spoken about this before, like, why would you teach someone who's been exposed to so much violence to more violence? But, you know, I think it couldn't be further from the truth. What would you say to that?
Oh, I agree entirely. There's, you know, yeah, I mean, you've spoken to it so well before, but the thing for me about teaching people to use their body in a way that they get to create their own boundaries has absolutely nothing to do with violence. It might be something that's useful for people who are impacted by violence, but it's useful for everyone. And it's not equivalent. Like, it is, you know, if I can take up the amount of space that is rightfully mine with my body, that's nothing to do with violence. And that's really all I'm teaching people. You know, the fighting's one version of that. But I mean, I teach everybody, our first move is this crazy ninja move where, you know, which we would call in karate a palm heel strike, right? So we're just, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, we're reaching our hand forward and pushing with our palm and getting our fingers out of the way. And you think about kids shows and like where there's ninjas, and that's the kind of stuff they do, right? They're like, hoo-yah, and they're doing these, you know, ridiculously racist and just stupid ideas. But when you get kids into a class and you say, that's the first thing we're going to do, but then you branch that with, like, if somebody tries to fight you, what are you going to do? You're going to tell them, no, you don't want to fight. And so let's put a no with a pushing sensation with our ninja move, which is a palm heel strike. Suddenly I get to embody the boundary that I make with myself. So if I'm someone who's been impacted by violence, whether that's a child or an adult, I'm suddenly learning that my body can make a space that maybe I didn't even know existed before. That's got nothing to do with doing violence.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with doing violence, because violence is, and I think you spoke to this before with us off air, was violence is doing an action to somebody without consent. That can be anything, any kind of an action, verbal action, emotional action, physical action, and there's always consent in fighting. And as soon as there's not consent, that's a tap, that's tapping out, that's a loss. And nobody's ever hitting anybody past a verbal or physical tap in any kind of combat sports situation. And then again, we're also not talking about what is the perfect way to fight to be able to defend yourself. Going on and on about it on this show. There are lots of great reasons to learn self-defense, but don't kid yourself thinking that self-defense is something that you were lacking and that was the reason why you were assaulted, or the fact that you have learned a couple of things in a self-defense class means that you're going to defend yourself. Because if a situation arises where you are attacked and you don't defend yourself, what are you going to do? You're going to blame yourself for the fact that, oh, you knew this and you still couldn't defend yourself. Why did you freeze? Well, we just spoke about that. It's a nervous system response. If the stress is big enough, your body will automatically freeze. So yeah, again, to get off the high horse, people are probably sick of this. Although if they listen to this show and they consistently keep listening to it, they keep probably being like, yes, we need to talk about this more. They are different things. And you know, I think the more people that come out and talk about how different that they are, the more that message gets spread. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't learn self-defense. So I think self-defense is like a great thing to learn if you find it fun. And like you said, you learn to set boundaries and you hold space differently and you walk differently in the world, but they are different.
Different, yeah. And I was going to say something to what you said before. I don't know, it's gone now. Mustn't be important.
All good, all good. So we have spoken about what could be different with kids.
I know.
Oh, go. Yes.
Yeah, going back to what we're doing with Braidwood Says No to Violence is about educating people so they understand that violence is a specific set of behaviors. You know, it's threatening and it's controlling and manipulating. And so that then, you know, they can pull that apart for themselves. They can see the difference that, you know, it's not just this old idea of, oh, he hits her, so therefore that's domestic violence. When you understand that it's about control, people are, if you can be educated to see that control takes many forms, like you said, through voice or through physical threat, then people are more likely to see it in the people around them, you know. So going back to that business person who suddenly sees that, oh, the woman, or who, sorry, I don't want to always say the woman, but the person is not able to pay for the food, or, you know, just these little things that you might notice over time where someone is always taking control. And this is the same in elder abuse as well, that the person who's doing the controlling of the situation could be using violence against that person and holding a threat against them. And like you say, that's got nothing to do with what we do in martial arts. So just for me, like, violence work is so much also about educating the broader community so that we can all be speaking about the same thing, which is what you're doing, and you should not stop talking about it.
Good, thank you. I always want a pat on the back. Let's recap, because we've spoken about a lot today. I think first, to touch on that, martial arts can be a great output for someone whose brain is wired to get obsessed with things and want movement, right? Another way we could say that is ADHD. Martial arts is going to be a great option if they find that they like it, or whatever their, like you said, with your kids, whatever their embodied practice is, something that you can get into and move your body is fantastic. So for parents with kids with ADD, that's a great place to start. When we talk about how to structure martial arts classes, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's interesting to think about how you can integrate more choices for people, how you can be more accommodating for where people might need things to be scaled up and down. And that could be dependent on where they are in their cycle. That could be dependent on some of the things that is happening in their personal life or has happened in their past. We can think about how movement practices are so critical to us growing older gracefully and being able to continue doing the things that we want to do, and how some primal movements are maybe being forgotten. And so things like crawling and getting down under fences and squatting down to chairs and standing up and things like that are so important to continue to do throughout the lifespan. We've spoken about domestic violence and how prevalent that it is and how commonly it manifests, or people don't realize that it's come up, whether or not they've blocked it out, their brain has protected them from it, or whether they don't want to talk about it. But it is significantly prevalent in our communities. And when someone is feeling really anxious, that might be a root cause of it. And regardless of whether or not it is, it's important to think about the polyvagal theory and some of the different responses that people might have to that and how we can help calm them down. And so for anyone who does think about that, something that I personally love is this idea of responding to someone who is feeling dysregulated, and that means their nervous system's dysregulated, so they're feeling stress. You can see some form of someone who's not okay is not to do logic and say, oh, you shouldn't feel upset because logic, is to look at their nervous system and bring it back into their window of tolerance, which if you think about the polyvagal theory, call that, I always get confused, dorsal vagal, ventral vagal?
Ventral's at the top.
Ventral's at the top. Ventral vagal is to get them to look around the room, get them to breathe, get them to feel their feet on the floor, get them to do some sort of a primal movement, and then relate to them, empathize with, totally understandable why you might be feeling this way. And then you can start to talk logic through people, but recognizing that nervous system responses are automatic. And so, trying to use logic to say, oh, you shouldn't feel like that can be less helpful. And I think martial arts, like we've spoken about, can be such a great outlet for showing people how they can take up space, they can embody all these cool movements, they get embodied by making empowered choices, they can see their body as useful for something other than looks, right? Their bodies are amazing and strong. We have spoken about, that there might be some different signs for domestic violence that you might not recognize easily, and we'll put links to some of the boards, Say No to Violence resources in the show notes here for people to follow on. And I feel like we've talked about heaps more than that. So as a recap for everyone walking away, I think, martial arts has come a long way since the 80s, where you're walking into gyms, and you can just tell from listening to this show that there are lots of really great places for women to train and for men to train. Because for men, if you think you're going to have a good time training in a dojo that doesn't look after its women, maybe rethink, right? I think even for men, look for how the women are treated, because if they're not treated well, that's a toxic training environment. You can just about guarantee it. It should be a big red flag for whether or not you want to train. My gym treats women very, very well, I think, and if it didn't, I wouldn't be there. So there's that to think about too. It goes kind of both ways. Is there anything else that I missed in that summary? I don't feel like it was even that brief, because we've gone through quite a lot, that you want to share with the kind of people who are listening to this show. You've got so many great insights.
That was an excellent synopsis of everything we just talked about.
Thank you.
I feel like you just described my life in a paragraph or two. I think the most important thing to anyone who's listening to this, because we're all coming from a similar place, is around leadership and mentorship. I know we had mentioned we would talk about that. We've kind of gone off topic, but
true.
Anyone who's listening to this is in a position of leadership for other women, because you wouldn't be listening if you weren't, So whether you're actually a teacher, or you're just someone in a gym, or you're someone who's thinking of stepping into the gym, like, all of us can be and do something for a woman that's coming up behind us, whether she's younger or, just whether she's had a different life experience. And I don't want to use the word owe, like, it's not that we owe it to each other, but we have the ability and the capability, particularly as women in the Western world, if you're listening from any of the places that you likely are listening to this, you have such potential to create good things in the world. So why not use what you've already got and what you're learning to lift other people up and lift other women up? I certainly, if I didn't have those few women in my life growing up that were doing that for me, and taking me along to things, or just showing me what they could achieve, then who knows? Like, there wouldn't be this generation of us now, So I just like to think about, we're sort of a generation or two on, what comes down the line after us, what's my daughter's age group and the age group after her, what will it look like in the scheme of not just martial arts, but all women's sport, after we've all been talking about this. So get into it, get involved with it, and don't be scared, because there's more of us than we think, that are saying these things. That's been a big learning for me, listening to your podcast. Like, they're out there. I'm not alone.
Yes. And even if you want to think about that from a more selfish point of view, in terms of why you should put yourself out there to help others, if you think about all your biggest wins in life and all the times where you felt like most proud, most of the time those have been things that have really impacted somebody else. And from a survival point of view, we are wired that way. We get oxytocin and dopamine, two great feel-good hormones or chemicals, when we do things for other people, not just when we do things that benefit us. Yeah, it feels pretty great, but it feels really great when you help other people. And once you start feeling that, like, you'll get addicted, can almost guarantee.
Yes. Yeah, nice.
Obviously. Case in question, Hollie. All right, I think we're just about going to wrap the podcast there. How do people get in contact with you?
Well, I mean, the Ninja website is motionninja.online. That's, and I do online classes too. So maybe if you've got kids particularly kids classes where there's kids that might be a bit anxious, that's certainly an option. So you can go and have a look there. In terms of counselling, my kind of broader company is Institute for Self-Crafting, and you can find that at .com. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll have links, Georgia. I never listen to that part of the podcast when people say that. So I just feel like, you can look up my name and you're going to find me, because there's no other Bakerboljkovacs in the world except for me. So that's an easy way to look it up.
Yeah, that is the thing about the internet now too. It's not even really that necessary, but I'll put links to your Instagram, Facebook, all the places where people can find you, depending on where they like to connect with people, because I think that is important to be able to offer.
I'm probably most active on Instagram. I don't really do Facebook that often. But yeah, so Instagram, if you want to talk to me or you want to see pretty pictures of where I live, that's the best way to go.
If you want to see where those roosters are coming from, that's where to go.
That's right.
All right, thank you so much, Hollie. Have an amazing day. Have you thought of something to be grateful for today? What was it? I'm grateful for the amazing women that train with me at the Fight Back Project. I'm grateful for Nari and the beautiful song Shape Me, which is heard at the beginning and end of every episode. And I'm grateful for you, for listening to this show and helping martial arts keep saving lives. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you'd like to like and subscribe, well, that's a bonus.
Nobody shapes me but me. Don't gotta tell you what my name is, I don't gotta explain it. Walk in the room, hear a boom erupting like I'm famous. I'm here shedding shells, I'm shameless. Half in nothing, no complacence. Walk too many tight ropes with no hope, so I became this poster they hold over all the heads of trauma holders. You don't need to know my history, I move boulders. Atlas shrug, cause I lifted the weight above his shoulders. No pretense of defense, move first like chess soldiers. This goes deeper than empowerment, cause I'm the one to power it. Physical meets mental, challenge me to keep devouring. If I can't change the scenery, at least I change perspectives. No longer isolated, but elevated and selective. Darkest places become beautiful spaces. This is where rage meets patience, meets power meets gracious. Meets, we're so glad you came and the feeling is contagious. When you the walking impact of intended bad intentions. When you the manifesting of collecting all they tensions. You the soul and body hold it all and still remember. But I'm a work in progress, testament to all contenders. Forgot what it was like to have control over self. Forgot what it was like to be the one in charge. Forgot in my reflection I could see all my wealth. Forgot that with my bare hands I break all these bars, barriers and obstacles. They can't cage me, they can't chronicle all my experiences and reduce them to appearances. When I was truly beaten, gave myself clearances to fall down, mess up, and get myself back up. I'm not looking for clovers, cause I don't believe in luck. Damn, you were badass, I heard them say it clearly. Why, thank you very much. I know now I'm not weary of what's next for me, cause I expect to see growth like I was planted, watered, fed, and bloomed to be. The positivity and accountability, knowing they won't step if I'm the agent of my agency. I think I found my voice again, huh? I think I found my voice again, huh? I'm not sorry, you're the end where I begin. Boundaries, I know them well. Take a breath and meditate. Who is she? I know her well. Now I get to open gates. 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't need your permission. And if you get uncomfortable, then use your intuition to know that I won't stay where respect is ever missing. And everything I do, that's me making decisions. It's truly underrated, the value of self-worth. Forgot that I was rich from the moment of my birth. A penny from my thoughts, no really, you can't afford it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it, huh?